Do you want to be ahead of the game for the latest in arts, music, cuisine, and entertainment across the Middle East's most dynamic capital cities? Al Monitor is proud to launch our City Pulse newsletters, focused exclusively on local news, starting in Riyadh, Dubai, Istanbul, and Doha. Each week, our on-the-ground writers in these cities cover the latest cultural happenings and trends, so you have everything you need to know for the best local experiences. To subscribe for free, go to almonitor.com, that's al-monitor.com, and sign up on our newsletter page.
Welcome to On the Middle East, Al Monitor's podcast on the big and important stories in the region. Today we'll be revisiting the horrors unfolding in Gaza, where at least 22 Palestinians were killed since Monday evening in a series of Israeli airstrikes. The Israeli attacks targeted earth-moving equipment used to reopen roads and to clear rubble under which victims are trapped. More than 51,000 Palestinians, most of them civilians, have perished in Israel's massive offensive on Gaza amid international efforts to end the conflict. It was triggered by Hamas's October attack in 2023 that left more than 1,200 people, also mostly civilians, dead. With us here to discuss the impact of Israel's war on the children of Gaza is Arwa Damon, a former CNN senior international correspondent who is the founder of the charity INARA. Damon has led several humanitarian missions to Gaza, but is now being denied access by Israeli authorities. Welcome to our program, Arwa. Very grateful that you found the time to talk to us today.
No, thank you so much for having me.
So, Arwa, it's a really, really dire situation in Gaza. Could you kindly update us on the latest humanitarian landscape there?
I mean, it's one of those situations that not only defies logic, but also to a certain degree defies understanding, even for people who are trying to live through it, even for people who are in Gaza themselves. And I say that because it's not just that they're living amidst the destruction, the physical destruction of everything that they knew to be real, but also the psychological destruction of their own being and of everything and everyone who is around them. You know, I'm talking to colleagues, I'm talking to friends, and the vast majority of them are down to one meal a day, if that. People who are displaced and who have been displaced over and over again are down to less than one meal a day. If you look at what the community kitchens are putting out, it's mostly rice or pasta, any form of nutrients, fruit, vegetable, meat. It's not available, and it hasn't been for weeks. Flour has run out, so the bakeries are closed. Some people have flour stock at home. They're able to ration that out for themselves. Access to water is another massive problem. People have access to a fraction of the water that they need to actually survive. And so you see this exacerbation of illness and disease that ends up spreading because of the lack of hygiene, because of the lack of proper nutrients. And you see this especially with the children, because kids, when they're young, their bodies aren't strong enough to be able to fight off disease and infection. And then, of course, there's the relentless bombardment that has started off even to a greater intensity than anything has experienced before. And, for the first time, I'm getting these questions from our INARA staff that are basically asking, why isn't this ending? And I just want to share with you something that I got from our physical therapist. And he messaged me saying, "Is there any news on the global stage or pressure to end this war? Does the outside world still know about our suffering?" And how do you respond to that and say the outside world knows, but nothing is happening?
The outside world knows, and the scary thing today is that talking about this stuff is almost criminalized. So it's really dark. But tell me, Arwa, so how does your staff actually navigate these horrors, these huge challenges? And you yourself, when was the last time you were there? I understand you don't have access anymore to Gaza. Is that correct?
No, I personally do not have access to Gaza anymore. So I went to Gaza 4 times in the last year, and I attempted to re-enter at the end of February. I wasn't initially flat out denied. I was pending. I attempted 5 times, and then I got a full-on denial of access of entry. It's important to note also, aside from the fact that I tried to message COGAT, which is the Israeli entity that coordinates everything to do with the Palestinian territories, numerous times to get an answer and never got a response at all to try to figure out, what concerns do you have? How can I address these? And that sort of a thing, especially, since they already let me in 4 times. But it's important to note that this isn't just happening to me. There's been roughly a 30 to 40% increase in rejections of people attempting to enter on humanitarian missions or on medical missions. There's entire teams of doctors who already had, critical to saving a child's life surgeries lined up who were denied entry. And the other thing with the whole system that's very difficult is that you don't get told ahead of time. So you have to show up in Amman and be ready to get on the convoy because we don't get the notification from the Israelis as to whether or not we're going to be permitted to go in until roughly 11 p.m. the night before the convoy is leaving at 6 a.m. And so you have this, situation where no humanitarian aid has entered since March 2nd. Growing numbers of, people who can go in to help are being rejected, and a population that now has to live in an increasingly smaller yet constantly being bombarded and starved space, with more than 60% of Gaza now being declared by Israel either, a no-go zone or is under some sort of an evacuation order. And people's psyche is being crushed. So you have hunger that eats up your guts. You have your mental capacity that has been crushed for more than 18 months right now. And on top of it, you have this knowledge. I mean, most people in Gaza know, unlike, my colleague who messaged, they know that the outside world is aware of everything that's happening.
Today's transformation of the Middle East is at the center of global geopolitics. Whether you're an analyst, diplomat, executive, or academic, you need the best reporting and analysis to understand what's really happening on the ground and what it means for the world. Al-Monitor is the award-winning independent leader in Middle East news. From Riyadh to Beirut, Abu Dhabi to Doha, and Baghdad to Tehran, our team of over 100 expert journalists report daily on the top stories driving the regional trends. Download our mobile app and subscribe to Al-Monitor to follow what leaders and decision makers are reading every day. Go to almonitor.com, that's AL-MONITOR.com, and use promo code POD25, POD25 for a discount.
And so, how does your staff actually operate there, given these constraints?
It's very difficult to operate, and it's also worth pointing out that there have always been constraints. There has never been a single point in time when getting anything done in Gaza was easy, and the constraints, the goalposts are always moving, and you're always trying to, I call it turning your brain into a pretzel to try to figure out how to just, deliver the most basic of things. Luckily for the mental health activities that we do, we have everything that we need in hand, and, we have the staff for that. But you also need to take into consideration that children who are hungry, thirsty, sick, scared are not able to benefit that much. And I was speaking to one of our team members recently, and he was saying, the most heartbreaking thing he heard a child say to him was, I've lost trust in myself. And so he asks, what do you mean? And he says, I've lost trust in myself because I allowed myself to have hope when the ceasefire began. And then when the ceasefire broke, I realized that I made a mistake and I should not have trust in myself. And that's a huge, huge thing for a child to say.
How old was this kid, or is this kid?
He was roughly 8 or 9 years
Oh,
old.
that's small. Oh my God, it's heartbreaking, as you say. Do we have any statistics on the number of actual children under, let's say 16 living in Gaza, and the number of orphans, the number of wounded?
So Save the Children, roughly, and most organizations have, over 50% of the population of Gaza is under 18 years old. Um, the number of orphans is not entirely known. The number of kids with that horrible designation right now, wounded child, no surviving family. The injured are in the thousands. The number of child amputees is the highest in recent history. We work with a number of children who have gotten out who have amputations, and there's one little kid who's in our program. He was 9 months old when he lost his leg, so he never even learned how to walk. And now, he came out close to the beginning, so now he's almost 2 years old and he's walking with a prosthetic, but he lost his leg before he even knew how to walk on it. And we also run two medical primary care clinics, and so obviously supplies there are significantly dwindling. The more pressure that's put on the hospitals because of the bombings, the more patients end up coming our way to try to clear some of the pressure off of the hospitals. But everything is running out. We have truckloads of medicine that are waiting to come in. We have kids' clothing, summer clothing, shoes, food that's waiting at the border. I mean, everybody does. And that is what I think is so crazy about all of this, is that I don't know, and I've been, in and out of war zones for more than 20 years right now, but I can't think of any other war where the humanitarian community was so entrenched into the community that we're trying to serve, and yet so incapable of providing them with what they need. Because the warring party that is a self-proclaimed, democratically elected nation state member of the United Nations is actively blocking humanitarian assistance, and that the entire world is watching access to humanitarian assistance, collective punishment, be a bargaining chip in a ceasefire negotiation.
Well, not only that, I mean, obviously that's the broader point, but more immediately and critically for people like your organization is the fact that they're being targeted, that they're being killed.
I mean, that's another like truly terrifying aspect of being in Gaza is, when we say, when, Gazans say there is no safe space, there truly is no safe space. I remember the first time I went into Gaza was actually 2 days after the strike on the World Central Kitchen convoy. And, that sort of paralyzed, everybody, the shock of it, because this was a route that the Israelis knew this convoy was taking. It was a coordinated movement. And so, you know, you do things to try to mitigate the risk as best you can. You coordinate your movements, you deconflict your locations. And when I say deconflict locations, this means that the coordinates are sent over to the Israeli side. They acknowledge that this is, a house that is staffed by or has, members of a certain organization living in it. They're not supposed to hit that house. And yet it happens too many times to be called a coincidence. You have more recently when the ceasefire broke, the UN ops location that was a deconflicted location in Deir al-Balah that is struck. No one's hurt in the first strike. And when they send a team the next day to survey the damage, there's a strike on them while they're there, killing 2 international staff members and wounding another 5 or 6 others. The ICRC building, deconflicted, huge ICRC flag on it. Top floor gets hit. Luckily, everyone's on the lower floors. What happened with the 15 medics, the rescue team,
Yeah.
were pulled out of their ambulances, according to OCHA's press release, pulled out one by one and shot. And Israel keeps changing its story on what's happening. And then it's always, oh, oops, sorry, it was a mistake.
And not to mention all our colleagues who are being killed.
I mean, the journalists are targeted to a different level than, the humanitarian community.
And I mean, the thing is that I, as a journalist, find it so hard to tell the stories of other victims in other parts of the world when the bar has just shot up in this way where the stories I'm telling almost sound like, oh, that's just kindergarten. It's just, how do you, or as I know this is kind of hackneyed, but still I'm sure our audience wants to know, how do you cope with this as a human being, as an individual? I mean, you're doing amazing work, you're trying so hard to help, but how do you deal with it?
It sits in your throat and in your chest. I remember the first time I went in, I was trying to put my finger on what makes Gaza so different because you felt it right away. And it wasn't the scale and scope of the destruction, which is horrendous, but we see varying levels of that in all the different war zones. It was that nowhere else in the world have I seen so many people who are dead. And I'm not talking physically dead. I have never moved through a wave of human beings who don't have that spark of life in their eye, like you and I do, and who don't have the opportunity to bring it back. And people themselves say, like, we're zombies. We're alive, but we're dead. And, if you talk about other war zones, no matter the risk, no matter how horrible they are, there generally speaking is a point in time where if you've survived the offensive, if you've survived the assault, if you've survived a bomb, you emerge into a safe space. With Gaza, you don't. You don't ever emerge into that safe space. You're never able to breathe. If you look at other war zones, the humanitarians generally set themselves up, a certain distance away from the active war zone, from where the bombs are falling, and people are able to reach them, albeit again, oftentimes very risky, and get the assistance that they need. In Gaza, that doesn't exist. And it's constant and consistent. I remember I met a mother who had heard that we did work with children, mental health work. And she came up and she said, my son, he's 6 years old, and every night he rocks back and forth, pulling his hair out and shrieks. And he's been doing this ever since he saw his sister's head blown off. And that happened in an explosion. And she was telling the story in a very, monotone, steady level tone of voice. And then I realized she was there too. She saw her little girl's head get blown off. And something must have changed in the expression on my face because she looked at me and she said, I know, but I have to stay strong for my other kids. And in that moment, I realized that this mother had to shove her pain down so deep because if she even let her voice crack talking about it, she was going to crack open. And if she cracked open, she was going to break. And if she broke, she would not be able to care for her other kids. We have a little girl in our program in Egypt. She came out with her aunt and her brother. And she and her brother were both injured. And she's not, technically speaking, an orphan, but she may as well be. She was in her mother's lap when the bomb hit, and her mother's body saved her life. Her father survived, but the man lost his mind after going through this. And this is what the aunt was telling us, he no longer remembered his own name. He no longer remembered where he was, and he no longer remembered that he had children. This little girl came out nonverbal. For months, she could not speak. She would not speak. And slowly, it's begun to come back. But the number of kids right now that we're seeing, that my team on the ground is seeing, that have gone nonverbal because of the trauma is terrifying. Children can't process this. Adults can't process this.
Well, so I guess the question then becomes, can they continue life in Gaza? And is it precisely to make them feel that no, they can't and they need to leave, that's Israel is doing this?
Ask anyone in Gaza that question, and they will tell you, yep, that is absolutely the objective. In fact, people have been saying this from the beginning, that the objective is to render Gaza uninhabitable, and not just physically uninhabitable, but psychologically ensuring that survival there is too much to bear. And I have people in Gaza right now who are basically saying, like, just let them get it over with. Or just like, they can't. They can't anymore. They just can't.
Arwa Damon, thank you so much for sparing the time to share all of this with us, and we wish you so much power in your amazing work. This brings us to the end of this week's episode of On the Middle East. If you want to learn more about Arwa Damon's work, go to the INARA website. That's at www.inara.org. And for more in-depth reporting on the Middle East, you can go to Al Monitor's website, which is at www.al-monitor.com. Thank you and goodbye.